me to say how great he was, I had other things I needed to say as well. And this event is sponsored by the lecture committee and the creative writing program, and I actually threw in a few bucks myself. Also, there will be books for sale right after this event in the back. I think Kim will be taking care of that. And there will be a reception afterwards at the pub, and everybody's invited to attend. So, and the books will be available there as well. Okay, thank you. I've known David in many different capacities. He has been a friend, my colleague, my supervisor. We've shared poetry and pedagogy. We've read together on the same stage at poetry readings, and we've shared creative insights and constructive criticism with each other. He's one of the finest writers I know, and his work has inspired me through the years. Because of this connection, I said, "David, I thought you wrote a poem about me in your new book." And he said, "Did you read Definition of Insanity?" Besides being extraordinarily perceptive, David is amazingly productive. Prior to Warriors, his two collections of poems are The Gospel According to Frank, and that's Frank Sinatra, and Everyday Apocalypse. Both collections are arresting, rich, and risk-taking. Though they are very different, they reverberate with a mythic energy. One of the many joys of the Frank Sinatra poems is that the hyperbole borders on truth, that pop icon and mythic god lend themselves to the mix of humor and awe. Both books are biblical in their scope. I admire the way they combine the funny and the strikingly poignant, the emotional and the symbolic, the beautiful and the bizarre. The short story collection, Boys, is a truly remarkable book that traces the many adolescent male journeys between the broken and the blessed. In some ways, he taps into the archetypal American story from Huck to Holden, where we, as a culture, capture our values, our visions, our fears, and stories that celebrate the charming and awkward, and stories that involve testing and transformation. I was going to say testosterone, and that would my next introduction, I will use that. And stories about moral acts of courage and the waking up of consciousness. In David's most recent collection, Warriors, he grasped the essential of what it means to be a son, a poet, a boy, a man, a human, a warrior. These poems enter territory that is mysterious and familiar at the same time. Thought-provoking, they go to the tabernacled parts of our lives where innocence and experience mingle, where words and silence mesh, where the sacred and the scarred become one. In an earlier poem in the book, he refers to believing there is only one dawn, one moment to sing, and deliciously sing he does. From Genghis Khan to Daniel Boone, from Sitting Bull to John Wayne, David explores the journeys and stories of these iconic figures and shows their relevance in helping to create our expectations of what it is to be a warrior. Ultimately, he turns history into myth, but his greatest accomplishment in these poems is how he turns myth into the staggeringly personal. The expedition that he is on is always inward. I dream my own voice, he says, in wonder and awe. He says, wait for me, I'm thirsty and need to drink. And he gulps from a soulful spigot where imagination and song gush out. Ultimately, the poems in Warriors do not celebrate those warriors skilled in combat from the ancient world to Hollywood, for he unflinchingly goes deeper and takes up the journey of the spiritual warrior, the archetype who is in touch with the joy, the sadness, the expansiveness of their hearts, able to share and give it to others. The warrior who commits to growing the heart and soul and becoming a creative being with a sense of compassion and courage to give, knowing we are all part of the same story. In his remarkable poem, Bedtime Stories, he writes, Within the story called Newborn, my father takes me from my mother's arms, holds me out in front of him, admires my chubby face and tiny fingers, and throws me with a great heave high into the air, so that I rise above the trees, above rooftops, chimneys, antennas, above the highest floor of the hospital, and turn 6 slow somersaults among the birds before floating down to him like a seed from far away. When the writing of all stories is finished, I use scissors to cut out every other word, locking these in a drawer of my desk. The other words I read to my children before bedtime, telling them not to worry about what is missing. This is the book of those missing words. Let us welcome David Lloyd, remarkable friend, wonderful poet, and spiritual warrior.
Well, that was beautiful. You did try to keep my book. I teach in a wonderful department, I have to say, the English department. And I'm very lucky. And within that department, in the creative writing program, I have 2 colleagues. I couldn't wish for better colleagues, Pat Lawler and Linda Pease. So thank you for the introduction, and Linda for organizing this reading. And thank you for coming on a Wednesday when I'm sure you have a lot of busy things to do. I'll probably read, 35, 40 minutes or so, and I do hope some of you, all of you, could get to the reception afterwards if you're free. If not, I'll hang around here too. So I'm going to mostly read from Warriors, and I'll talk a little bit about those poems, but I wanted to start with actually a brand new poem. And I don't normally do that because you discover after time it could really be bad. So it's wise to let it sit normally. But I wanted to do something fresh, and it's titled Higher Math. I have a daughter who's bringing home a lot of math, which is very difficult for me when I'm helping her. And that started the poem, but it's as you'll see, it's about relationships. So Higher Math. 2 plus 1, she asks. 2, he says. 3 plus 2, she asks. 6, he says. 6 plus 3, she asks. 3, he says. Stop it, she says. I know what you're doing. No, he says, you don't. Yes, she says, I do. You're dividing. You're multiplying. You're subtracting. You're evading. You're deliberately misremembering. You're consciously irritating. But you're not adding. I am adding, he says. Very precisely, very carefully, just doing it with different numbers and in secret. Okay, and I wanted to read early in this reading a poem. I think there are a lot of writers here, a lot of students in creative writing classes probably. And I wrote a poem titled The Inner Nothing after I was part of a conversation that had to do with creativity, I thought, if I can find the poem here. And it features a guy whose name I didn't put in the poem. It begins with J, so I just call him J. The Inner Nothing. Jay believes some people do not have inner lives, only inner nothings. I say some people can free their inner nothings to become outer mouths that proclaim the nothingness electric, the cruelest nothingness, the nothingness with a room of its own, the nothingness 'tis of thee, and the love song of nothingness, louder than the loud inner somethings some people believe they own, louder even than the bird who boasts of his inner nothing each morning, because, after all, he's just a bird with nervous eyes, hollow bones, a flimsy voice box with a big voice, with a tiny chest that could be crushed by the weakest fingers any moment, in any place, for any reason. There's a poem here that's actually not written for Pat Mahler. It's titled Schizo. It's nothing to do with that. But it did make me think of another wonderful writer who's here, Michael Berkeley, who, not because of the title, but because it's set in Utica, New York, where I grew up, which is my hometown. And it looks back on teenage years in Utica. Michael grew up in Rome, New York, north of Utica. And Michael was my first creative writing teacher. This is for Michael. They're all the names we should mark. There it is. Schizo. I rarely get back through a jacked window to the basement of Utica Catholic Academy, Genesee Street, November 1970. Or to your brother's apartment, his baby asleep. Or the edge of Kirkland Woods, our bikes released into the long grass. Those old, newly born worlds consumed with touch, as if touch alone could keep us breathing. Which it did. Breathing and burning through the ice ages of 1970 and 71. Our glacial growth, the woolly mammoth in the pulpit, the petrodactyl in the cage above the mantle, the fossils in the choir stalls, the ripping of fault lines, the short circuits of locker rooms, the black holes of what's passing or tellable, our nuclear parents, our bomb-sheltered bedrooms, our airlifted siblings, the chemical dumps in our bloodstreams, the doomsday machines in our pants. You get the picture. We were schizo with what newfound fingers could do or undo. We couldn't wake or sleep without it. We couldn't let it go. And a related poem, which maybe can have a little bit of background to it, called Skin. A few years ago, I was doing some research at UCLA Library, and it was the summertime, and I had to take an elevator down to this sort of bunker at the bottom of the library where this archive was. It had no windows, and I would work there for about 9 until you couldn't get any more materials, about 3. And then I'd take a bus from UCLA to Venice Beach, Pacific. And it was the big blue bus that cost you $0.25. It was wonderful. And when I arrived in Venice Beach, nobody was wearing any clothes. At least that's what it appeared to me. They had some clothes, but it was like skin is everywhere. So this came out of that experience. With its omnipresent minions, sun and sand, its obescent ointments, opaque concoctions, its infinite economies of absorption, we all know that in this world, skin is king. The hugest organ, the fitted carpet, the stretchy bucket for blood, the tightest t-shirt behind which cower lungs, hearts, livers, intestines. Oh, mistreated, misbegotten skin, original and sloughed off self. Blotch, burn, wrinkle, suffer the needles and dyes of outrageous desire. Lover's bite, mother's pinch, crack if you must, and hump, and flex, and callous, and pustulate. But hold me, hold me, hold me forever in your everywhere embrace, like the eggshell, its undelivered egg. I mostly don't write in forms, and there's only one form that I really felt attached to, formal poetry, and that's the sestina. So I've written a lot of these, and I'll read one tonight that's in this book, and it was the title poem of my first chapbook, The Everyday Apocalypse, and I included it in Warriors as well. And a sestina is a great form if you're obsessed about something, an obsessive person, or your subject is something to do with repetition. It has 7 stanzas and 6 stanzas of 6 lines each. And the last word of every line in your first stanza must be repeated as the last word in every subsequent stanza in a certain position. And the last 3 lines, the final stanza, has all 6 words woven in, and it's in pentameter. It's the sort of thing I would normally hate, but I do like it for the kind of subjects I like. So, the everyday apocalypse, which is about really the repetition of dawn every day. Invisible among the branches at dawn in my backyard, the birds begin to sing, because, as birds, they believe this sun rises into the darkness of the last day, that this blue will never be blue again, that branches will never bend this same way. They can't know it's forever been this way. The world turning, the moon falling, then dawn when one has all but given up. Again and again, they disregard the facts. They sing because they can't remember yesterday or imagine tomorrow. The sun's slow eruption into the night is the sun's most perfect performance. It goes on its way thereafter, leaving them just one day to squawk about, one chance to take, one dawn to make them open their eyes and sing about something, anything. What do they gain, we ask, by forgetting? What do we gain by remembering that perfect sunrise by Cape Cod or Bar Harbor? How singular that strip of burning cloud way off in the distance. Those memories of dawn, the brains of birds can't hold from one day to the next. Maybe. But just for one day, I'd like to shrink down my overstuffed brain, sit myself in the quiet before dawn, and see what I won't know is the sun, announcing itself by degrees the way I couldn't know it always has. I'll sing then without pausing to hear what I'm singing. My tiny brain will take in the day, knowing without knowing that the only way to be is to forget the word again, the word of freedom, even the word sun, and believe there is only one dawn, one moment to sing. If we begin again, it might be a day without trees, clouds, sun. It might be a long way to reach the dawn. So I've written a number of poems in actually each of these poetry books about place and humans in the world and the environment. And I'm going to read one from the Gospel according to Frank. Pat mentioned is a poem sequence, about 50 poems or so, that are related. And it was published as a small chapbook first, and then as I wrote more poems, republished as a book. And so this is one of the newer poems that can be read, I hope, outside of the book itself. The book is about Frank Sinatra. It's about creativity, but also about ego, right, and violence, and about large human spirit and ravenous human spirit. This poem is Trajectory. We stood from the ground. We stretched arms into air. We climbed above the canopy. We laid stones upon stones upon stones. We hauled ourselves up the highest mountain, littering trails with our shirts. We constructed skyscrapers that only we could topple. We improved upon birds. We saw everything that we were not. We expanded ourselves to a mass greater than the greatest planet. burned hotter than the sun and more distantly. We organized the universe into orbit around ourselves and sucked into our belly all near objects so insistently not one can remember if it ever had a body of its own. And I think I'll read a definition of insanity, which is nothing to do with Pat. It's about, well, it relates to the same subject. One definition of insanity is following a course of action that results in your own destruction. So it's a poem about the art. And I wrote a first draft actually sitting in my yard, so a lot of the details are about the place where I draw from the place where. Sometimes we need to be without the overhanging sky, the performances of branches, the pulsings of apples nearly red, without birds twisting their heads, without the ever-present air, without thistles, without insects flickering almost out of sight. Yes, skin is close and radiant with longing. Touch me are its only words. But it too may be set aside if we restrict our gaze to the absolute self, a void more void even than our imaginings of space. Yes, sometimes, let's admit this, sometimes when that void shimmers beyond our fingers like a god confined to a book with a last feather released from the last bird, then we're willing to give up the drawing in even of a final breath. Warriors is a book, as Pat mentioned, it features a lot of actual warriors, real or imagined figures. Sitting Bull is in there, I might read that poem. John Wayne, an Arctic explorer, as well as domestic heroes. I have some family poems in here, and I'll read a couple of those. But I got interested in conflict because, of course, our country has been at war for over a decade, so you can hardly avoid the subject. And I used as a cover this little warrior here. You probably can't see it much, but it's got a huge helmet with horns, like a Viking, and little stick legs, like they can just snap them easily. And the vulnerability with this fierceness appealed to me. It's a sculpture by Kim Wally, who's here, and I've loved it. My wife Kim for many years. So you should get the book just actually for that image.
Shameless.
I'll read the Sitting Bull. Which I hadn't planned on reading, so once I get a better plan, there it is. It begins with two quotations. The first is by Sitting Bull himself, who talked about his youth growing up. And he said, "When I was a boy, the Sioux owned the world. The sun rose and set on their land. They sent 10,000 men to battle. Where are the warriors today?" And this is an advertisement from a company called Custer Gold, Inc. More than 100 years after Custer discovered gold in our backyard, we're still finding quality Black Hills gold for you. After the Black Hills swung its gold watch one absent-minded afternoon, the hypnotized thousands arrived to pray in the sacred folds and clefts, lifting up joyous spades, pans, and concealed weapons. The buffalo objected by removing themselves from history. The prairie grass received a prophecy of its trampling under black boots. Water tried to be scarce. The gold buried itself deeper in hidden veins. In the hills remained, as always, above the fray. But Sitting Bull, torturing himself to a vision in the Sundance, raised his slashed arms and smiled as he watched dead cavalry soldiers tumble from the sky. At Little Bighorn, the hills wrapped around the Sioux like God's own blanket. Sitting Bull spied on the spies, creeping through grass as if hunting extinct animals. He listened to the good news the wind carried. He pitied the 3 lines of condemned horses, advancing their burdens of metal, men, and ambition. Of their still bodies, Custer would make a steaming fort for his last stand. And that's actually true. The soldiers in the cavalry put the dead horses around them as a kind of a makeshift fort as they tried to defend themselves, hopelessly as it turned out, from the sea. And I'll read a sequence which opens the book. This is the longest set of poems I'll read before I draw things to a close. It's a 5-poem sequence. It's about Genghis Khan. I was at a writing residency some years ago, and I came across a book which was a study of the Mongol Empire, and Genghis Khan, one of the most ferocious warriors ever. So I was taken with that, and I wrote these 5 poems. It's historically based, but it also connects to the contemporary world, I hope. And it begins with a quotation that I'll read. I don't know exactly how the author of the book knows what Genghis Khan said. Somehow we remember it written down, and this is what he tells us. Quoted in a book called The Mongol Empire, Its Rising Legacy. The Khan said, "The greatest joy a man can know is to conquer his enemies, to ride their horses, and take away their possessions, to see the faces of those who were dear to them bedewed with tears, and to clasp their wives and daughters in his arms." The first poem is the second greatest joy. Genghis Khan set himself on top of the wall, and with his sword dismembered the parading clouds, which were too astonished to resist. He stuffed the shreds into his pocket, next to the dew he hacked from the grass that morning, next to the head of Shah Mohammed and the leg of the Pope's emissary. He enjoyed the empty evening. He sized up the stars, which flickered weakly, wanting to seem more distant than they were. He murmured to himself about the faces of the loved ones of his enemies. He almost closed his eyes. Genghis Khan feared nothing. Not the interior vacuum. Not the grandchildren of the clouds that would one day storm in for revenge. Not the tidal wave of rage unleashed by the spirits of the countless butcher. The second greatest joy, Genghis Khan once told his gathered hordes, was never knowing from where the next arrow will arrive. From the east, from behind your back, from the womb of your favorite daughter, from under your eyelids, from the sky, which can seem so tranquil on an evening like this, without a cloud in sight. When the Khan was cold, he drank the blood of his favorite horse, then stitched up the wound. When thirsty, he diverted the holy rivers of the Himalayas to the trough by his golden tent. When desirous of pleasure in bed, the inhabitants of Transoxania lost every second daughter. When hunger confronted him in the night like a beggar with a bag, any running dog was fair game. And if, when he woke, the color of the sky was too red or too dark, then the great potentates of the West had better put aside their presumptions and their maps, board up their palaces, make peace with neighboring infidels, stockpile spices, intoxicants, and virgins, and bid farewell for at least a decade to forests and farmlands, peasants and conscripts, small mammals and the green shoots of spring. What's next? Los Angeles intrigued the con, with its subtle poisons and intravenous freeways, allowing for such comprehensive deployment around and into the citadels. Mythic treasures littered the basements of high-rises, slaves as common as cockroaches in an unsprayed kitchen, orchards and migrants on a Persian scale. The end of the known world, or the beginning of its end. But afterwards, the Western Ocean to face with a terrible scowl. And after the ocean, onward to reconquer the Gulf, then to the steppes for fresh slaughter among old friends. That is why the gods made the world round, and why for the Khan time did not exist. In the conquered land of the dead, even in his dying, the Khan was ravenous, hatching plots against the gods he might or might not confront when spurring his sacrificial force across that new frontier. He didn't fear the prophet wielding the scimitar, having learned from that one's cowed descendants the exact worth of a prayer and work. And the one wearing the crown of thorns concerned Genghis Khan not at all. If he enjoyed his crucifixion once, he could do so again. It was the multitude of gods that most occupied the dying mind of the Khan, for they required exact calculations. How many sticks to be poked under how many rocks? How many mountains climbed? How many years to lure the last tutelary out from the last waterfall and burn on a pyre of brambles in the conquered land of the dead. Lifetimes later, when the historians tallied up the sons and grandsons, daughters and granddaughters, their children, the children's children throughout the ravaged world, taking into account migrations, rapine, incest, bastardry, desertions, they discovered that some tributary of the great river of the blood of Genghis Khan flowed in the veins of every person in the world. Some spent their lives ignoring this truth, glumly, resolutely dragging the plow across the earth year after year after year. Others hid in their apartments, brooding over imagined barricades that loomed on each side of the street. A third group denied the legends, even as they whipped up their personal hordes to a homicidal frenzy each morning after a cigarette and a second cup of coffee. I think I'll read a couple of more personal poems, sort of still in the framework of heroes. This is a problem with time, and so it's quite a switch. And I'll read this poem, which is about my mother, who lived to be 97. And then I'll read a very new poem that I brought about my father. In a wheelchair in the nursing home, celebrating her birthday, my mother won't believe she's 95. She won't believe I am 54. My brother 56. The year 2008. She won't believe that the disappearing sun will rise in 13 hours. She doubts the second hand on my watch. She cannot understand why she's brought to bed each night, why lifted out each morning. She refuses the absence of loved ones long dead, the faces of loved ones present. She marvels at my beard and teeth. She won't agree that the God she worshipped has grown old. When my dog spins in circles, chasing a tail, she She smiles. It takes 10 seconds to catch that tail. She knows it's been an eternity. And my father, he died very young. He died at 58, and I was 13. So my poems about him are from mostly the perspective of a boy. And this one is titled Boy's Will, which sort of echoes a Frost poem. Maybe even titled Boy's Will. There's a book.
He ripped it off from Moyne College.
Okay. Frost and Moyne. Boy's Will. My father died when I knew him as a boy knows his father. That mouth full of words and teeth. And I was a boy. So I wanted more, as boys will. My father as a boy. His father as a boy. A father who tells stories about being a boy, a man, a father, a grandfather, loosed into a void of boys, and men, and girls, and women. Those stories, a boy's will. The need to mirror the mirage, the metaphysics of flesh and muscle. I need absent mirage, mysterious mouth, touch, smell, teeth, words. And I will end with a short sequence and then one little short poem. And this little sequence is at the end of the book. It's titled Lessons in Geography, and it's 4 poems, and each one tries to address a stage of life. So they just titled childhood and so on. But the whole thing is lessons in geography. Childhood. The turquoise parrot squawks in 5 languages, while the monkeys pirouette and grand plie. Each night a new species of butterfly unwraps its wings. Each day someone discovers the cure for cancer. My friends, the ants, have erected a hill with many mansions. They haul in crumbs from my breakfast, and I sip God's nectar from their lips. It's true what parents say, that the world is endless and beautiful, but not as beautiful as me. Adolescence. A lunar landscape. White mountains, black craters. Nothing offers, nothing stirs on a Saturday afternoon. High above the body, a great blue and green orb turns and yearns like a far from home, a beaker where life breathes. Beyond the void, voices whisper my name. Bones skitter over the crusts. Starlight warms the eyes. Adulthood. Let there be light, I command, and TV shines its multitudinous mirrors. Let there be dark, I command, and a finger flicks a switch. But there's grumbling in my plumbing, an ache in my left knee. The children have abandoned me for other children's charms. Go forth, I command my armies, arrayed across the yard. Reconquer the world. But like the Macedonians at Ephesus, they're squatting. They're tired. They're frightened by elephants. We can only imagine what they already know. That's true. You might know that who was the great Greek warrior? Alexander, that's Patrick. Brought his armies to India, and they didn't go any further. They're done, they said, and they got old age. Beyond the rippling air, 3 palm trees where shades congregate. Your grandmother rolls out dough on a stone slab. My father turns a page. My mother ladles water from a bucket to a cup. Wait for me, I say. I'm thirsty and need to drink. And the poem I say for the end is one that I wrote. Well, actually, it's set at home. I didn't write it. It's set in my office. One floor down, over in that direction. It's called Perfection. And I'll give you a little background to it. Before I had a daughter, I would work very, very late at night, and I often worked in my office. And I could be there at 1 or 2 in the morning, writing or reading or preparing classes. It just was my habit. And there'd be a guy who would come in because they cleaned offices at night, and I would talk to this guy. And one day he just stopped coming. I don't know what happened to him. He's not around now. This is a few years ago. But this poem commemorates him. There's a lot of lies in it, but it comes out of him. And I call it Perfection. One day, the man who empties the trash from my office wastepaper basket, who limps and doesn't speak clearly or well or even often, tells me he sleeps with 14 cats. So each night, he's touched in different places by different cats, stretching, kneading, licking tails, yawning, settling themselves with different access at different times to his warmth, dreaming of him, or maybe not, who can know. While around the bed, he tells me, 13 dogs take turns patrolling perimeters, curling up on pillows he's tossed on the floor, or pacing by windows and doors, checking locks, latches, keyholes, sniffing the apartment air, punctuating the night with growls or barks as necessary. While outside, he says, the squirrels never stop perfecting their acrobatics for the morning breakfast show, and the birds sharing those branches and telephone wires in the dark gather in 2s and 3s to wake him, he says, with a chorus they never get right. Will they try again each morning, as faithful as his dogs? And one day, he's very sure of this, they will sing perfectly in unison. Well, thanks a lot for coming.